Imagine a man who had it all: riches, fame, endless parties, and a seemingly bright future. But instead of finding joy, he plunged into the deepest void anyone can feel. This man is Peter Foligno, whom the world knew as a noble nobleman, but whom history immortalized as a humble bell ringer. What could have driven someone to abandon the palaces and hide in a small cell high up in a bell tower? This is a question that guides our story today, a journey that proves that true greatness isn't always found on the illuminated stage, but in the silent places where almost no one looks. Peter's life is one of those stories that seems to have been written to shake our comfort zone. He experienced the world's pleasures to the limit, but nothing could fill his soul. Until one day, at the darkest point of his existence, he found a light that would change everything: faith. From that moment on, his journey was no longer marked by banquets and riches, but rather by prayer, simplicity, and radical surrender. It's curious how, sometimes, God uses the unlikely to demonstrate the power of transformation. And that's what we'll explore in this video: how a young nobleman became a cathedral bell ringer, leaving behind not only his former life, but also a legacy that resonates to this day. Get ready, because the story of Peter Foligno isn't just about the past, but also about us, about the choices we make daily, about the bells we can ring in the lives of those around us. So, settle in, open your heart, and come with me to discover how one man's inversion can become the eternal calling for an entire generation. When someone heard the bells of Foligno, they didn't just hear a metallic sound striking the air. What rang out from there was a true melody capable of touching the soul. Pedro Crisci, the bell ringer, not only rang the bronze, but transformed each chime into a message of faith and hope. It was as if the bells became the very voice of God, reminding the people that time passes, but eternity awaits. To this day, when you hear a bell ring, you can sense that it always carries something beyond sound, a silent message that calls us to look deeper. Pedro understood the rhythm, knew how to alternate between the largest and smallest bells, and created something akin to an improvised symphony. This unique language enchanted everyone, because each ring had an intention: to summon people to Mass, warn of danger, mark mourning, or celebrate a victory. If you stop and think about it, it's like the notifications we receive on our cell phones today. Every ring, every sound carries a meaning. But unlike digital notifications that often generate anxiety, Pedro's bells evoke peace. It's curious to note how, throughout history, sounds have shaped our way of living and reacting. The most interesting thing is that no one thought about who was behind those chimes. It was almost magical. The bell rang, the heart soared, and that was it. But there was a simple, hidden man there who dedicated his life to this service. This idea leads us to reflect. How many times have you received something valuable without even wondering who was responsible? It could be a song that changed your day, a word that soothed your pain, or even the invisible work of someone who never appears. And if even the bells had a silent guardian, isn't it time we discovered who this man was who gave so much of himself in each chime? Pedro Crisci was born in Foligno, in the verdant heart of Umbria, a prosperous land brimming with culture and religiosity. His family was one of the wealthiest in the city, enjoying privileges and everything that wealth could provide: parties, influential friendships, an intense social life. All of this was available to him. But behind the surface, there was a profound emptiness. How often do we see people who, even surrounded by luxury, carry in their eyes that feeling that something is missing? Pedro knew this feeling well. The sudden death of his parents was the blow that shattered the foundations of his comfortable life. At 30, with wealth and friends, but no direction, he found himself sunk in a silent anguish. During the day, he sought distractions. At night, the silence revealed the weight of a purposeless existence. This internal conflict is something that still affects many people today. How many don't try to fill the void with travel, parties, or shopping? It's as if their heart was crying out for answers that money, however abundant, could never provide. The curious thing is that Pedro maintained a demeanor of normalcy. He smiled with friends, appeared confident, but when he was alone, it was as if he were staring into a mirror that reflected only pain. This teaches us a powerful lesson. Life may seem stable, but without meaning, it becomes a burden. Like him, many only realize they need change when everything that sustained their security crumbles. And it was precisely in this abyss that Pedro's story began to take an unexpected turn. Amidst the emptiness of his own life, Pedro began to observe a movement that radically changed his way of seeing the world: the mendicant orders. He saw Dominican and Franciscan friars walking the streets, dressed simply, preaching fervently, and, most strikingly, living in poverty. These men, who owned nothing, carried a serene, almost inexplicable joy. It was as if they had found an invisible treasure that no material wealth could buy. Pedro, accustomed to banquets and luxuries, could not understand how that austere life could be so full of meaning. The friars not only preached, but lived and practiced what they preached. They fed the poor, cared for the sick, heard confessions on the streets, and yet they walked smiling, full of hope. This contrast astonished Pedro. After all, while he, with wealth and comfort, lived in anguish, these men, stripped of everything, seemed free. It's like seeing someone who gave up a promising career to make a living helping people, yet still conveys more fulfillment than someone surrounded by achievements. This is impactful because it shows that the meaning of life isn't in accumulating, but in giving. And it was this living example that began to awaken in Pedro a restlessness he could no longer ignore. He wondered, what is their secret? How can they be so happy without having anything? This kind of questioning opens a dangerous gap, because those who ask sooner or later seek an answer. Pedro, who had previously tried to escape the emptiness with distractions, now began to face a new possibility head-on. Perhaps happiness wasn't found in inherited riches, but in something much greater. And it was at that moment that grace knocked on the door of his life, ready to transform him completely. There came a point where Pedro could no longer bear the weight of emptiness. For the first time in years, he knelt before the Virgin Mary, asking only for a light to illuminate his inner darkness. This simple, almost clumsy prayer was the beginning of a complete turnaround. Without delay, he sold all his possessions and distributed them to poor, giving up every comfort he knew. It's curious to note how, sometimes, the answer we seek comes not in long speeches, but in small gestures of surrender, like Peter's. He understood that he needed to lose everything to finally gain peace. After that, his life became a path of penance. He slept outdoors, lived on alms, and spent his days counseling those who sought him. And, to the surprise of many, his words carried a power that went far beyond theory. People reported miracles, healings, renewed hope. It was as if God had decided to use the very person who had previously lived lost in excess to now be a beacon for the afflicted. This example teaches us that when someone chooses to truly change, they not only change their own life, but inspire transformation in those around them. It was in this context that his testimony reached St. Angela of Foligno, who was in the midst of her conversion. Seeing Peter's radical surrender, Angela rushed to make a profound confession and begin her own journey of change. Note how the effect of sincere life never stops there. It always touches others. And here's a practical reflection. What kind of example are we setting? Even in small things, a word, an attitude, or even a smile can ignite a spark in someone. This was the case with Peter, and it would be only the beginning of his even greater mission. It was then that Peter received an unusual invitation to be the bell ringer of the Cathedral of Foligno. There was no salary, no luxury, just the responsibility of caring for the bells and living in a small cell in the bell tower. But for him, that was more than enough. He accepted with joy and dedication, as if he had been given the noblest mission in the world. And indeed it was, because each toll of the bell carried with it the chance to unite heaven and earth. For Peter, that work was not just routine. It was prayer, it was offering, it was love translated into sound. The cathedral bells had a function that went far beyond aesthetics. They called the people to Mass, reminded them of the passing of time, warned of tragedies, or celebrated great victories. In 1279, when an earthquake devastated the region, the bells rang out incessantly, like cries of hope amidst the destruction. And there was Peter, not just ringing them, but descending into the rubble, helping the wounded and comforting those who suffered. It's impressive how someone who lived with nothing could offer so much. This detail shows that when a heart is full, even empty hands are capable of transforming realities. The bell ringer, hidden high in the tower, became known precisely for his humility and the strength he conveyed. His small cell in the belfry was a symbol of the simple and dedicated life he chose to live. Each peal that echoed over Foligno was like a wordless sermon, preached to all who listened. And here comes a practical challenge. If even the simple act of ringing a bell can mark the life of a community, imagine the impact of our small gestures, made with love and purpose. Peter reminds us that it's not the size of the mission that matters, but the greatness of the dedication. Over time, Peter's testimony disturbed some former acquaintances who accused him of heresy before the Inquisition. But instead of condemnation, he received confirmation of his holiness. The tribunal declared that God was pleased with the penitent's life, and this only increased the people's admiration. Pedro continued as a bell ringer until the end, until July 19th, 1323, when he departed this world in the odor of sanctity. His name, to this day, echoes like the bells he so loved to ring, carrying a message of faith that has spanned centuries. After his death, the population rushed to the tower to visit the space where he lived, and they were greatly surprised. His cell was nothing more than a small hole at the base of the bell tower, a cramped, almost suffocating space that demonstrated the radicality of his dedication. People wonder how a man could live there, but they soon realized that it was precisely in this discomfort that his greatness was revealed. After all, when someone renounces excess to live in simplicity, they show that their true home was never in the world, but in God. This legacy was not trapped in the past. Peter's memory lives on, reminding everyone that holiness is not for a select few, but for those who choose to live authentically. And if he, who already tasted luxury, managed to find fulfillment in poverty, what excuse remains for those who insist on living trapped in emptiness? This is where his story continues to provoke us, because, like the bell that never stops ringing, his life still calls the hearts today to seek a deeper meaning. And perhaps it is precisely the life of Peter of Foligno shows us that no past is too heavy for grace to transform. He, who knew both applause and temptation, chose to silence his pride to hear only the voice of God. And by becoming a cathedral bell ringer, he discovered that it's not the size of the mission that matters, but the dedication with which one lives each gesture. The sound of the bells he rang wasn't limited to calling people to Mass. They were silent sermons, reminding us that faith can give meaning to even the smallest daily tasks. When we look at the cramped cell in which he lived, we realize that the greatness of a life is not measured by the space occupied, but by the intensity with which one loves. Peter chose poverty, not as a defeat, but as a victory over himself. And this simple yet radical choice still resonates today, as a call to all of us. After all, how often do we seek happiness in fleeting things and forget that the true treasure lies in living with purpose? Peter reminds us that even a single bell toll made with love can change an entire city. And now the question remains, what bell do you have to ring? It may not be bronze nor in a tower, but it could be a gesture, a word, an act of generosity that resonates in someone's life. Peter's story didn't end in 1323. It continues every time someone chooses simplicity over vanity, surrender over selfishness. So, if this message resonated with you, share it, like it, and subscribe, because here we continue to bring you stories that inspire, challenge, and transform. Until the next video, and may the bell of faith never cease to ring within your heart.